Well, welcome back to Along the Road. We are here in Kingston, New Hampshire at the First Congregational Church. I am Pastor Josh, and this is
Katie, the Children's Discipleship Director here.
And once again, we have another guest with us. We're very excited about this. This is Pastor Thomas, the Reverend, the Good Doctor. There's a lot of titles that you have. Which one do you prefer the most?
Don't forget my first initial W.
W, that's right. Don't forget the W. And so he is with us today. We're going to have, I hope, a wonderful conversation. As you know, we this season we've been trying to have some guests. But part of it is, maybe some of you know, but not all of you know, you've been here at the First Congregational Church, I think now over 27 years, 25, and then I showed up, so sorry. No, but you for people online to know, like, you had a purposeful plan with the leaders of transition of leadership.
True.
And one of the things I say to my friends who ask, or people who hear this story, and they're like, is everything okay? So they're always concerned about that. I tell them often, I said, it's a dream to work with Pastor Thomas in this transitional leadership, because you have never made me feel like less, or I'm not good enough, or I'm doing it wrong. You've fully supported our leadership. I feel like we support each other, and I've loved the relationship. So for people to hear, not only have you been here this long, you're very supportive, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a heart that the church continues to grow. Not just your way or my way or Katie's way, but that the church continues to grow. So welcome. We're glad you're here. So what we're going to do today, and maybe even into the next episode, is we're going to have two things we're talking about. We'll get to know Pastor Thomas a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit first about people who are aging, maybe going into retirement homes, and a lot of people have family members. Maybe it's their parents or their grandparents. You hear now, especially my generation, people are starting to have taking care of parents and taking care of children, and they're kind of split between these things. And the reason we brought Pastor Thomas in for that is somewhere in between ministry and being back here, you also were the president, was it president or CEO?
President and CEO.
And CEO of a home services in Massachusetts. And I'll let you explain some of that later. But before we get to that,
yes,
I'm just curious of parts of your story. Like me, you're a pastor's kid. And so I know that kind of plays into where you are. I remember as a pastor's kid, I remember in kindergarten, half-day kindergarten, which I know is different. Today it's all day. My dad would pick me up, and we may end up in a hospital visiting somebody. We may end up somewhere else. I remember kindergarten, first grade being part of my first funeral. Not because I knew the person, but because my dad was doing something. And so there was this part of life that older I didn't want, but look, here I am. So my curiosity first begins with, at least on the ministry side, what made you go, I'm going to follow in that, maybe not follow is the right word, I'm going to take this path, if that's the right way to put it.
So, to be perfectly clear, I was not headed for ministry, at least not pastoral ministry. I fell in love with journalism in high school, and did a lot of journalism in college, working with local newspapers, 2 of them, and editing a college newspaper. Editing a high school newspaper before that. But when I was a senior in college and had been accepted at a graduate school in journalism, I went home at Christmas time, and my dad by then was in a adjudicatory role with a denomination. He was not pastoring, he was pastoring pastors.
Yeah.
And so we went to visit a church that I'd never been to before on Christmas Eve.
Huh.
And the pastor of that church greeted me at the door and said, so you can identify with this because it happens to PKs.
Yes.
Well, David, welcome home from college. We would like to have you speak tonight at the Christmas Eve service.
It has happened to me.
Tell us, take 5 or 10 minutes and tell us about your story.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that happened that night, an elder in that church and the pastor in that church came to me together. This was a few days later, maybe a week later. and said, David, we respect your interest in journalism. We've heard about it. But we believe God's hand is on you for preaching. And we hope that you will at least reconsider. And so after that, I did. I was accepted into a seminary program, Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and finished there with an MDiv, and then came to New England to pastor. So
The rest is history, as
yes,
they say.
as they say.
As they say. Yeah, I didn't know that part of your story. I think that's great how God used two godly men to say,
Right.
you're just off by a degree, and you listened. Maybe not to them, but to God at some point.
I think that my parents were concerned that I not go into the pastoral ministry as a kind of, your dad does this, you should do this kind of thing. And so they were very cautious, and I appreciate that to the day and try to honor that with other people that I'm influencing.
Yeah, absolutely. My parents said the same. My dad said, if you want to be a trash man, because I told him that at one point in life, he's like, then be the best one you can. Do your very best. And they always said, whether you're doing that or you're a doctor or you're a lawyer or you're just working in a business, they just want to know, what are you doing within the body of Christ?
Right.
Not that you're a pastor, just what are you doing? And I always appreciated that. There was never a push or an expectation. Though I will say they were quite pleased when I did go that direction. Yeah. So in life and in that, somewhere, and I'm just curious, I know you've worked with the home services and you were the CEO president, but there's a passion in you about this that I don't see in a lot of people. And so I'm first curious where that passion comes from. Like, what led you to that? You could have been a CEO of anything, maybe not, but it seems like you could have. You have very good skills at that and leadership and that mindset. So why choose people going into retirement homes or at as you look now, like to say, at that advanced age of life?
So I would say that it was less me choosing and being chosen.
Okay.
So this is exactly what happened. I had been a pastor for probably 6 months. It was an incredibly small church, literally 3 families and 2 elderly ladies.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in seminary, I learned in a pastoral care class that pastors ought to care for the older people in the congregation.
Yeah.
So I started visiting Lena and Eva.
Wow.
They happened to live in a senior residential, low-income senior residential community. And so probably another 6 months go by, and one Sunday morning, a stranger showed up in the worship service. And afterwards, he introduced himself as the board chair for an organization in the city of Haverhill, Massachusetts, that had been sponsored by and formed by a group of churches to provide housing and social services for low-income persons.
Right.
And he said, frankly, I'd like to recruit you to be on our board. And I said, you hardly know me. I'm new in town. What would cause you to invite me to do this? Oh, he said, you have become famous at Bethany because you visit your parishioners.
Yeah.
And the care that you show. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So that was 74 maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was on the board there until 89. Served as treasurer of the board, which is, I wasn't handling money.
Yeah.
I was overseeing the handling of money. I was president of the board a couple of times. And then in 89, Reverend Crook, there had been 2 executives before me, both of them pastors.
Okay.
And so when Norman Crook retired, the board asked me to consider that position.
Yeah.
It happened concurrently with a change in my pastoral life, my personal life, and so I have tried to look at it as God's timing
Mm-hmm.
and His provision. And so that's why I was at Bethany for until 2013 when I retired from Bethany.
Yeah. And so Bethany, as far as I understand now, has more than one building now.
Absolutely. We, excuse me, we at the time had 3 sites and about 50 employees.
Okay.
When I retired, we had been involved in securing the management responsibility for a 4th site, and then I helped to develop a 5th site in a site in Groveland. And all of these, in one way or another, were not all of them government related or funded, but all of them were aimed at specifically helping people as they age to do so in a comfortable and safe environment, sometimes with subsidies of one kind or another.
Right.
There are several different state and federal programs that we were involved in. And maybe the biggest thing that happened during that period of time, which relates to the subject that you might be asking me about later on, is that, and this started probably in the early 80s, we recognized, and as is usually the case, the government later on recognized
That's true.
that you could care for people much more effectively, safely, to their emotional, physical benefit by keeping them in their home for as long as possible, rather than sending everybody, assuming that everybody's going to end up in a nursing care or long-term care. So a lot of our emphasis morphed from just housing to the social services that goes along with that. And that involved multiple layers of funding effort and changes in regulation and hiring more people and all of that.
So there was a mindset somewhere in there that I'd say, if I'm not mistaken, you're ahead of the curve of this holistic thinking of the person. You know, I don't know how popular it was when you first started that, things like independent living, you know, and then like some transitional care, and then, because now it becomes like a whole market, and it's so different than I think what it used to be, and the services that I know that you talk about are the community that they still try and have there at Bethany, because I think you're still on the board there.
I'm not on the board at Bethany, but one of the things that happened while I was there was that we started an adult day health center. And so I am still on the board of that. It's an independent organization that rents space from one of the buildings that Bethany owns.
So you've seen that change tremendously.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Like the healthcare has changed. The nursing care is now called residential center. They have all different names. It's changed a lot over the last 25, 30 years. And you are most of these for lower income people as well, or it's a mix?
So Bethany was aimed at low income people. And always, and I emphasize this again today, Bethany always gave a priority to people who were homeless. And
nice.
So we had waiting lists just like everybody else who does residential care. But if you could demonstrate homelessness, you went to the head of the list. And we gave priority to those people, very often partnering with organizations that we may have helped or encouraged to exist. Ruth's House in Haverhill and Common Ground, a mission organization that our church helped support, because those homeless people, when they moved in, even if it was a very small studio apartment, they didn't have anything. They didn't even have a bed, let alone a table and whatever else that might be nice to have in a unit. So yes, and since I've retired, the organization continues to grow. Bethany just opened 56 new units in downtown Haverhill, and those units were designed, and the programs that support them were designed to address this continuum of care. So there are more staff members, because in the old days, you had a property manager and a facilities manager and a couple of maintenance guys. But now kitchens and meals. And,
Everything.
Well, and
Physical
you've got,
therapy.
I was going to say not just a nurse on staff, but then you've got physical therapy and
Yeah.
Right, CNAs, yes.
all
And,
of
and so the
And we cooperate with, but sometimes those services are not on staff,
they're outside.
but they're,
the community.
right.
Yeah.
exactly.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but you're constantly coordinating with them and with a care plan that somebody might
Yeah.
be benefited by.
So you
Right.
you have this goal that as much as they can first be at home
Mhm.
or in their home, they should be there as long as possible. As much as they can when they're in the buildings to have dignity, I'm guessing as much independence as possible to really allow that the best amount of
So
time.
this is true, and has application for people who might be watching who have older parents
Yeah.
themselves or grandparents. Sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle because
Yeah,
nobody else
nobody
is
else
available
knows, yeah.
or interested or whatever. I've seen a lot of elder abuse, and that's a whole nother subject. But to find the balance between independence and providing enough support
Mhm.
that doesn't cause them to become dependent.
Yes.
And that's different for every
That's
person.
a hard one.
Sure.
That's a
And the
very hard one.
situation that they're in and requires a lot of not research, but understanding, listening,
Yeah.
Patience.
patience,
Yeah.
adjusting along the way.
All right,
of those
so let me
things.
ask some questions along those lines. If I'm not there yet, so my parent, I know they're not there yet, but if, is it of value? We're not there yet. Maybe it's 5, 10, 15 years down the road, but you start seeing it. Is it of value as the adult child, to start having some of those conversations with the parent, the aunt, whoever, and just say, "What? We know it's around, it's coming. So what are some of your goals? What do you look for in a community?" And to kind of already have that conversation with the person that will be in need. Is that of value as well?
So, almost universally, people wait too long.
So sooner the better.
So Patricia and I are perfect examples of this.
I hadn't gotten there yet. I was going to ask you.
We all avoid, both the elder and the family members avoid, and frankly, the more independently minded and the better health a person has, the more likely you are to avoid the conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I always tell people, start early, listen, and watch for signals, things that you see around the place where the person is living, what they're saying about their time, and remember that maybe one of the key components to life changes, negative life changes, negative health changes is isolation. It's amazing to me how, and just yesterday I was at Rockingham County Nursing Home. I visited 2 people who are surrounded by other people. They don't even have their own space. They're in a 2-bedroom. They have nurses coming and going, social workers, but these people are genuinely, emotionally isolated.
They're alone.
Despite the fact that they're surrounded, and you hear people talk about this in other ways, that we are more often surrounded by people and yet socially deprived.
They're
So
alone.
how do you
They're
tell
alone in a
that?
crowd.
So
How do you tell that? Because you can't tell it just by looking, obviously, because you see them surrounded by people. So how do you tell?
listening. There are lots of questions that you can begin to ask, and long before long-term care, conversations about health, about safety. Do you feel safe here?
Okay.
How do you see your future? And these are conversations which you don't come to at the last minute or with preconceived notions or ideas,
Yeah.
but you let somebody talk. Very often one of the first things, unless somebody has obvious health issues,
Yes.
Yeah.
very often one of the first things that happens relates to driving. So we all know that in our culture, a sign of independence is when you get a driver's license.
Yes.
And one of the signs of it's a huge thing
It's a
in
milestone.
anybody's life.
Absolutely.
And it's all at the other end, it's also true. One is positive and hopeful and filled with excitement and joy, and the other one is a form of grief
Yeah.
that is not often talked about. You're losing your independence. You're taking something away from me.
Oh,
I may not drive that car more than once a month, and probably only down to the post office and back.
Right.
But when you
But I
take
can.
the car away, right?
Yeah.
When you take the car away, or they feel like an individual is made to feel like it's been taken away, rather than them participating in a conversation about it. There are also identified markers. So social workers or residential care providers, or if you go even to someplace like a home for mom or visiting angels, or the United States is divided up into resident care areas by the federal government.
Right.
So every, they used to be by congressional district. I don't think that's true anymore. I'm not sure exactly how they do it. But for example, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, it's called Merrimack Valley Resident Services or Elder Services of the Merrimack Valley. In New Hampshire, they're not quite as proactive, but the Department of Health and Human Services has a division that is specifically for adult and aging care. I think it's called the Bureau of Adult and Aging Care, BAAC.
Yeah.
And if you call the Department of Health and Human Services. So those people are available to counsel. And if it becomes important or critical, they're available to do professional assessments. But I got distracted there from myself. But
That's okay.
those social workers have what they call markers, activities of daily living,
Yes.
ADLs.
Yeah.
So eating, being able to prepare and eat a meal for yourself, dressing, bathing, a couple of others.
Right.
So when a professional comes in and they do an assessment, they want to evaluate those 4 or 5 areas, and they sometimes even give the person a score. And depending upon the score, they might recommend this kind of service as compared to some other kind of service.
I find with because it sounds like you said, like on the other end of the spectrum, it sounds like the same version of early intervention. They come into a kid who's not talking a lot, and then they do certain things and go, oh, no, there's no markers here. Let's do these things, and let's see where they are in 6 months. And all of a sudden the kid, like, language begins to develop, and the parent was all worried. Other times there's markers because they do an assessment, but this is the opposite end. And but then these people, most social workers, can become, I think, a great resource if you are willing to do the homework and to talk with them, and then they can connect you with other places and stuff like that and services. So as a family or as a person who's going to take care of someone and have that, having that conversation early is important and understanding. But I'm assuming you've seen this. There's a difference between you've never had this conversation and, oh, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, whatever, like, we're taking your keys. We're doing this. But then there's that, okay, good conversation where they understand, they're part of it. At which, have you seen the point where, like, how do you know when to cross that line? Like, okay, we've had this conversation a lot and you're not giving this up and it's becoming dangerous. We don't want you to end up in a residential care, but that might be safer. And we've had that conversation. The person resisted that. I don't think you can't force them in there. But, so.
If the issue is driving, having a vehicle and driving, I always recommend soliciting the help of their primary care physician. Very often that person is trusted, they're objective, they're outside the family unit, they can deliver bad news, and you have less risk to losing trust and the ability to have those kind of conversations.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just, especially with regard to driving. But my guess is that if you start early and you're having lots of these conversations with them, to be quite frank with you, I've not said this publicly, and now I'm saying it on the internet, but we have one daughter who is more upfront and bold than the other adult children. And she's the one who, by the way, several years ago said to me, "So, Pastor Thomas, what are your intentions with regard to my mother?" So anyway, they're very likely to say, "So, are you happy?
Yeah.
Where you are now?
Yeah.
What do you think? You think you're gonna try to stay there longer? Would you rather?" And they know about my involvement, for example, with Riverwoods, as well as Bethany, and of course across the street there's All American.
Yeah.
Sometimes they approach it in a more gentle fashion. So tell us what it's like when you go over to Riverwoods.
Yeah.
Do you have friends over there?
Yeah.
What do you do with them? What do they do?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more specific because all of these different levels and possibilities have financial impact too.
Absolutely.
So along with cars, Social Security and Medicare are big issues. And part of these conversations can be helped by positive intervention. Life changes might change their Social Security benefit. Mom, have you been to the Social Security office recently?
Yeah.
Dad's gone, or this has happened, or whatever. There might be some way to have more for you. Can we go down and talk to the people and see what's going on? Also, obviously, there are other financial issues that need to be, in order to, most people want to avoid probate court if you can. So what can you be doing to have a trust?
Yeah.
And what is a trust? The various kinds of trust. Or even if there's not, and some people think, I don't have a lot, but even bank accounts or IRAs or any of those kinds of things. And the more you can be, and maybe I'm talking as much to seniors now as I am to their children.
I think it's both ways, you're right.
The more you can be upfront and honest and let people know these are the things that we have put in place. These are the places where I feel need. This is where I don't feel safe. All of those kinds. The more you can have those conversations, the healthier it is. But adult children need to learn to listen.
Yeah. So in those conversations, it's not like, Mom, you need to go to the Social Security office. You need to. It's like,
no.
Have you thought of this? Talk to me about this, and I will help you. So you're a lot of advocating, encouraging, listening. So if we take that picture, and here I'm an adult child, and my mother or my father, they're like, okay, I'm willing to start. I think maybe I want to think of independent living or residential place, because I know some places, if you want to make sure you're there for like memory care or everything, you have to start at the beginning to be able to, and they think through that. What are some things that I would do or you would recommend to people? We're going to evaluate the places. There's 3 different options, main ones in our town or in our area, because I have seen and I have experienced, people that go into a place that is like the Waldorf Astoria of care and all this money and all these things, and a year or two later they're being neglected. It's not right. Things are falling through the cracks, and then fortunately with open conversation, they're not feeling safe. They're not move them to a smaller, tiny place that you wouldn't even have thought of before. They're happier. They're more cared for. They have personal attention, and it also costs way less, but wasn't even the reason. So how do you begin to evaluate that? You don't want to just look at the dressing on the outside. Hey, we're a high-end, expensive place, so trust us. So
Well, that's true, but my experience has been that if you visit a place or even drive by a place, and It is well cared for, up to date. The leaves are raked in the fall, and the grass is cut in the summer, and so forth. The snow is removed when you drive by. Chances are they're doing a good job on the inside too. Not always is the case, and frankly, one of the biggest issues for senior care, whether it's residential or assisted living or long-term care, right now is staffing.
Yeah.
And so many, and probably you experience this in your healthcare too.
Yeah.
Patricia and I have. Lots of places are frankly understaffed. Rockingham closed down their rehab units for months and months and months because they could not hire enough people. So if you walked on that floor, and you probably wouldn't because there was nobody there, but if you did, the rooms were all vacant. That's changed somewhat, but they still have a staffing issue. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with the financial management at Riverwoods, and they acknowledge that they're having staffing problems. And of course, some of it relates to the cost of that, to the benefit of the employees. It costs a lot more to have a CNA now than it did even 3 years ago. That's good for the people. We want them to have an affordable life, an affordable job. They're giving direct care to people. That's valuable service. They ought to be recognized for that. But on the other hand, it's difficult to recruit. Nurses are incredibly difficult to recruit. And that's kind of a cultural issue. At some point, maybe the pendulum will swing and more young people will find value in that kind of care.
I know of a family that liked the facility that their mother was in. It's a nice place, but felt, well, they couldn't be there very often as a family. Like trying to get there once a week, it's not enough. And the staffing wasn't enough to really, they care, no lack of care. They actually, because they were able to, they hired someone. They came almost every day. Let's go for a walk. Let's talk, play games, puzzle, all kind of that. They became like a friend, but they were also there to help move along and keep on schedule. And of course, the residential community couldn't afford to have someone like that for everybody. But I'm assuming it's a consideration for the child to go.
I had a funeral last Saturday. And family only, except for one person. That one person was the young lady who was her caregiver. And she had been with her for 4 years.
Wow.
It was her full-time job to care for this young lady. Now, a lot of people can't afford that, obviously. But she was. She had become a member of the family, and she cared for this lady and was with her every day. She had 2 sons. One of them lives a long ways away. The other son is my age and single. And so his income allowed him to do this. And it was good for everybody. We have a couple in our church who are using that same model. So it works for some people. We haven't talked about the fact that almost all of these places you have qualifiers. So even at Bethany Community Services, to qualify, there were financial aspects. Some places have mental acuity or health markers that qualify or disqualify you. That's especially care. So long-term care insurance is a whole nother issue. But if you move into Riverwoods, for example, they essentially buy long-term care insurance on you. So you have to qualify for that long-term care insurance. And if you're too close to what they consider to be a high risk pool, then they may not be willing to provide you that insurance, and consequently you might not be able to live there.
So they all have their parameters that they're working with.
it's non-discriminatory. It just makes sense. It's
Yeah.
reasonable that.
Yeah.
It's a good business practice.
Well, so that gets to the issue of some of these places being nonprofit and
Yeah.
some of them being for-profit. So Bethany, Riverwoods are both nonprofit organizations. That doesn't mean, by the way, when you ask to see their financial records, that they shouldn't be making a profit. If they're not making a profit, you don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Right.
But
She's
on the
gotta
other
build
hand,
it, upkeep it, and do the other things.
right,
Yeah.
the profit does not accrue to the benefit of shareholders or to owners
Right.
or to some other kind of investor. That money gets poured back in to the building,
Mm-hmm.
to the activities or whatever it might be with regard to the people who live there.
So one more thing in this part of the conversation, and then I think we'll take a pause and move us to the next part. How do you see, you end up in a residential zone, I'm going to be there someday myself. What happens with their community
That
of
would be
faith?
the good news if you end up.
It would.
See?
It would be. I am too. But what happens with the community of faith? Like, some people have been part of a community of faith for 20, 30 years, and they end up at a Rockingham, or they end up at some other place. Sometimes they end up 40 miles away. The children say, you need to be near us.
Right.
And they understand that. It's not an argument. All that being perfect, with quotes, right? All of a sudden, they spiritually feel alone.
Right.
You know, what should I, as the child, be thinking of, or what can they do in that sense?
Well, when you investigate any site, one of the things you want to talk to the staff about are their activities and the range of activities. And the best places have some kind of a spiritual component. It may not be exactly what you've been used to, but even Rockingham's a public facility, but even they have a chaplain.
Yeah.
Exeter Hospital used to have more hours, but they still have a chaplain, lady who's there, very respectable lady, very helpful, has been helpful to me over the years. Smaller organizations usually depend on volunteer members of the clergy from the community.
Okay.
And so that's what I do at All American. You just need to ask questions. And we had a couple that attended our church. Their family lived in Concord, so they moved to be closer to the family.
Yeah.
But the move happened early enough that they could find spiritual nurture. It was not nearly as wonderful as First Congregational
Of
Church.
course
How
not.
could it be? How
No.
could it be?
I
But
know
nonetheless, people came. They came to know people. They came to know the pastor. So it's been a healthy thing for them.
Another vote for doing it early.
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Have that conversation. And also for the churches to realize, yes, like even our church, I know you go and you're a great place. You go to Riverwoods, you go to All American, you go to Rockingham. But we've also decided, if they will let us, to bring more of the church at different times of year. Youth group goes there, or we go, like at Christmas, we go sing carols there. And I don't think, often we think, we can take a group there. I think we've discovered they were delighted to have us come and
Most of the time, we should not get discouraged when we're not immediately welcomed.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that almost all of us who have been involved in senior residential care have had bad experiences with churches and religious people.
Yeah.
And I'm using the term religious here in a positive light, not a negative light.
Yeah.
The more that organization encourages residential participation. So here's another question when you're investing. Do you have a resident council?
Oh, yeah.
Are any residents invited to be on your board of directors?
Mm.
Those all help you to know whether they're have their own agenda or whether they're really listening
Open.
to possibilities. But in any regard, yes. The earlier you make the decision, the more you can care for that. And I don't want to. This will come across as negative, and I'm sorry, but my experience is that adult children are less likely to give attention to the spiritual care of their parents than the parents gave to the spiritual care of their children when they were younger.
Yeah.
And that disappoints me.
Yeah.
I could speak about that at another time, but
Yeah.
I just, we need to be more proactive about that.
Right.
People who are aging have spiritual needs that are unique to them, and they're making and thinking about, whether they're willing to talk about it or not, life and death. When you're 34, you assume you're going to live forever, right?
Yeah.
But when you're 84, you don't assume that anymore.
No.
Not even close.
So there's the opportunity for a lot more significant spiritual conversations to be had. So.
Well, it seems like in all aspects that we've talked about, even this last part, I've heard you say over and over again, the biggest thing we can do is start to listen. And listen and listen. And starting early, but that means you're listening early. So when you get to 84, or whatever the age is, you've already developed that listening skill and the hearing and understanding. And I think, we don't often have open conversations about that with our parents or aunts or whoever we may be helping, or the other way, with our children who we hope will help us, in that manner, to listen. And I think that would be good. So I'm going to take a little pause here, but for you guys, I just want you guys to take a moment, think of who's in your life like that, and maybe start the listening journey before you think of anything else. So we'll pause here. We'll see you next week, because we're now going to start talking about visiting people in hospitals of any age at any time. So,
Take care.